April 1241. Western Poland, the most formidable war machine the medieval world had ever known, was about to meet the proudest knights of Christian Europe. What followed over the next 3 days would demolish the illusion of European invincibility and carve a wound into Christendom's memory that would ache for centuries. The Mongols had arrived. To grasp the scale of what was about to unfold, we must first understand who these Mongols really were. They weren't the mindless savages that frightened European scribes later described. They were heirs to Genghis Khan's revolutionary system of warfare, a disciplined engine of conquest that had stretched its reach from the Pacific Ocean to the edges of Europe in less than 2 generations. Every Mongol warrior was born in the saddle, riding before he could properly walk. He could hit a target with his bow while galloping at full speed, survive on mare's milk and dried meat for weeks, and cover distances that no European force could imagine. By 1241, the Mongol Empire spanned from China's coast to the very doorstep of Europe. The mighty cities of Central Asia had fallen, and the great powers of the Islamic world had been broken. Even China's Great Wall, the so-called barrier against the north, had failed miserably. Now, under the leadership of Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis himself, 3 Tumans, about 30,000 of the most efficient soldiers on earth, had already annihilated Kiev, the jewel of the Rus, and swept through Hungary like wildfire. This invasion was not random plundering. It was a meticulously planned campaign. Batu divided his forces. One army ravaged Hungary, while another marched into Poland, eliminating every possible threat to their flanks. They had already torched Lublin, looted Sandomierz, and left Kalisz smoldering in ruins. Their next target, Silesia, one of Poland's richest duchies. Duke Henry II of Silesia, known as Henry the Pious for his deep faith, understood what was coming. He wasn't naive. Distressing reports had poured in from the east, whole cities burned to ash in a single day, populations slaughtered to the last soul, veteran armies erased within hours. Witnesses called them demons on horseback, fighters who appeared from nowhere and vanished like ghosts. Yet Henry refused to flee. He was an experienced commander and knew that if the Mongols were not stopped here, Europe itself would lie exposed. He sent desperate pleas across Poland, Moravia, and the German states. The response was staggering. The Knights Templar, legendary veterans of the Crusades, answered his call. The Teutonic Knights rode down from the Baltic, their heavy cavalry armored in black and white. Polish nobles set aside their rivalries and rallied their men. Duke Mieszko of Opole brought his full host. Moravian infantry marched north. Even miners from Silesia, men who had never seen battle, took up arms to defend their faith. Terrified chroniclers later claimed that 100,000 men gathered to resist the Mongols. Modern historians, comparing logistics and population records, suggest a more realistic number of 25 to 40,000, still one of the largest European forces of the medieval age. For comparison, William the Conqueror had taken England with barely 10,000 men, and the Crusaders' mightiest armies rarely topped 30,000. Opposing them stood around 20,000 Mongols, 2 Tumans under Baidar and Kadan. The Europeans outnumbered them, wore heavier armor, wielded superior steel, and marched under the Pope's blessing. They believed God was with them. They would soon learn it wasn't enough. Baidar, grandson of Genghis Khan, and Kadan, son of Ogadai, were no savages but masters of strategy, men trained from birth in the science of war. The Mongols had spent years studying European warfare through spies disguised as traders. They knew every strength and weakness of their foes. The European knight was the tank of his time, a man, a horse, and a mountain of steel capable of smashing infantry lines apart. But the Mongols understood their flaws. Knights were slow, their mounts quickly exhausted, and their desire for glory made them reckless. Most crucially, they fought best in close combat, while Mongol warfare was about killing the enemy before he could even reach you. April 7th, 1241, Day 1. The European army advanced from Legnica in traditional formation, a vision that would stir any medieval heart. In the center rode the heavy cavalry, knights clad in chain and early plate armor, helmets glinting in the sun, lances raised high. Each set of armor cost what an entire village might earn in a year. Their war horses, huge destriers bred for power, snorted and pawed at the earth, ready to charge. On the flanks marched Polish spearmen, Moravian crossbowmen, and Silesian miners wielding crude tools turned into weapons. Priests walked among them, offering blessings and absolution. Banners rippled across the field, the black cross of the Teutonic Order, the red of the Templars, the white eagle of Poland. It was the combined strength of Christian Europe made flesh. Then, on the horizon, dust. Not the heavy dust of a marching host, but a lighter, restless haze that moved unnaturally fast. The first Mongol scouts appeared, small figures on small, wiry horses. The knights laughed. These were the dreaded Mongols, tiny men on half-sized mounts. Surely they could be crushed in a single charge. The Mongols rode closer, but not too close. They stopped just within their bow range, far beyond that of the Europeans. The Mongol composite bow, crafted from layers of horn, sinew, and wood, could strike targets with lethal accuracy at over 350 meters, far beyond the reach of any European crossbow. Their riders loosed their arrows high into the sky, then wheeled their horses and sped away. "Cowards!" shouted the Polish knights. "They flee like rabbits, like women." But fleeing was the plan. It wasn't fear, it was doctrine. For hours, waves of Mongol horse archers tormented the European lines. They would gallop in, unleash volleys of arrows, and retreat before the heavy cavalry could respond. Each warrior carried roughly 60 arrows, with pack horses trailing behind, loaded with hundreds more. 20,000 men times 60 arrows, over 1 million projectiles. The mathematics of death. The Europeans raised shields and endured, but mentally it was breaking them. These knights had trained their whole lives for gallant charges and sword-to-sword glory, not to stand helpless as invisible enemies bled them dry from afar. Horses screamed as shafts found the gaps in their armor. Men cursed as arrows pierced mail at the joints. The unarmored infantry suffered the worst. Duke Henry ordered his crossbowmen to return fire, but by the time they cranked and aimed, the Mongols had already slipped back out of range. The Templars begged permission to charge, but Henry refused. He knew too well what that meant. The Mongols wanted his men to break formation, to chase ghosts and die in pieces. Yet, holding ground while being slowly torn apart was just as deadly to morale. By sunset, the true terror of Mongol warfare had revealed itself. This would not be a duel of honor. It was systematic extermination. When night fell, hundreds of Europeans lay dead or groaning on the ground. Horses had to be killed to end their suffering. The camp echoed with the screams of the wounded. The Mongols. They'd lost perhaps a dozen men, a few hit by lucky crossbow bolts. As darkness fell, they made camp just beyond sight. Their signal fires dotted the horizon like fallen stars. And then the drums began. A deep, rhythmic thunder rolling through the night, pounding on exhausted European nerves, denying them sleep. Day 2, April 8th, 1241. The dawn sky burned red, an omen even the priests struggled to dismiss. The Europeans, sleepless and shaken, reformed their ranks. During the night, many of the wounded had died. Arguments now flared among commanders. Polish nobles bickered with the Templars, while the Teutonic Knights demanded an immediate attack. Duke Mieszko of Opole threatened to pull his men out entirely if they continued to stand idle and be slaughtered like cattle. Henry realized something had to give. When the Mongol riders reappeared that morning, harassing as before, he made a crucial decision. He ordered Duke Mieszko to lead a partial cavalry charge, not the whole force, just enough to drive the horse archers away and perhaps seize a few for questioning. 2,000 of Poland's best knights thundered forward, shaking the earth beneath them. Lances lowered, shields locked. A storm of steel and muscle roared across the plains. The Mongol light cavalry appeared to panic. They turned tail and fled. The Polish knights erupted in triumph. After a day of humiliation, vengeance was at hand. "We have them," Mieszko shouted. "Press forward, glory to Christ, kill them all." The chase went on for miles, but the Mongols always stayed just out of reach, turning now and then to shoot a few arrows, teasing the pursuit onward. Some Polish nobles began to sense the danger, but Mieszko, consumed by fury and pride, pushed his men further. It was exactly what the Mongols had waited for. The feigned retreat, the masterpiece of Mongol warfare, was unfolding to perfection. As the knights became scattered across the plain, their tight formation stretched thin, the trap was sprung. From hidden slopes and hollows, Mongol heavy cavalry, yes, they had heavy units too, erupted in force. At the same time, light cavalry that had been circling unseen closed in from all directions. Mieszko understood his mistake too late. His men were surrounded, cut off from Henry's main army, stranded on open ground where their heavy armor offered no advantage. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. The Mongols didn't duel for honor, they killed with machine-like precision. They circled the trapped knights, firing volley after volley into the dense mass of men and horses. When the Europeans tried to charge, they met coordinated counterattacks. When they stood still, the arrows rained down without mercy. Only when the survivors were weak and broken did the Mongol heavy cavalry move in for the final blow. Duke Mieszko fought bravely. Accounts say he personally struck down a dozen Mongols before 5 arrows pierced his body. His bodyguards made a last stand around him, singing hymns as they died, but the outcome was certain. Of the 2,000 knights who had charged that morning, fewer than 200 returned. The survivors were shattered, some physically wounded, others mentally broken. They spoke of riders who fought like demons, who moved as if of one mind, who killed without mercy and without a word. One knight, his armor pierced by 7 arrows, died whispering again and again, "They are not men, they are not men." That night, the Mongols sent a grisly message to Henry's camp. Duke Mieszko's severed head, packed in salt, accompanied by a single note written in broken Latin, "Tomorrow, you." Day 3, April 9th, 1241, the day of annihilation. Henry's war council that morning was a scene of near hysteria. Nearly a quarter of his army was gone. The Moravian infantry were close to mutiny. Several Polish nobles had slipped away in the night with their retinues. Retreat was impossible. Henry knew the Mongols would hunt them down like prey across the plains. There was only one option left: stand and fight, whatever the cost. He chose his battlefield carefully, a rise near the village of Legnica Pole, or Legnica Field. The slight elevation gave his archers range, and a stream along one flank would guard against encirclement. Henry arranged his forces in a defensive formation. At the center stood the Templars and Teutonic Knights, men sworn to fight to the death. The Polish knights formed the right wing, the remaining infantry the left, while Henry held a small reserve behind them. When the morning mist lifted, the Mongols appeared once more, but something looked different. They weren't riding in their usual sweeping formations. Instead, they seemed to be setting up odd-looking devices, large pots or cauldrons mounted on wooden carts. The Europeans stared, confused. Were they cooking, performing some pagan ritual? Then the battle began, and the true horror revealed itself. The cauldrons were Chinese gunpowder smoke generators, not cannons. Those wouldn't appear in Europe for decades. The Mongols had mastered this technology during their campaigns against the Jin dynasty in northern China. As Henry's army advanced, the Mongols ignited the devices. Thick, choking clouds of black smoke billowed across the field, rolling over the European ranks like a living fog. Within minutes, order disintegrated. Men couldn't see beyond a few feet. Commands were lost in coughing and chaos. Units became separated. Banners vanished into the haze, and with them, all coordination. Knights stumbled into their own foot soldiers. Horses, panicking in the smoke, reared and bolted. Then came the Mongols' most devious trick. Days earlier, they had captured Polish prisoners and forced them to learn one short phrase in Polish, uciekaj, strata, run, all is lost. Now, amid the suffocating smoke, Mongol warriors shouted those same words in perfect imitation. Polish soldiers, unable to see who was shouting, heard what sounded like familiar voices ordering retreat. Panic spread faster than any weapon. Men began running, colliding with comrades who still tried to hold the line. The left wing, the infantry, broke first, fleeing in terror. That collapse exposed the center, where the Templars and Teutonic Knights now stood isolated in a sea of confusion. The Mongols struck with terrifying precision. How they maintained coordination in that smoke remains a mystery, perhaps through drums or horns at low frequencies that carried through the chaos. Or maybe they simply knew their roles so well, every man moving like part of a single organism. Mongol light cavalry hit the flanks, showering arrows into the disoriented mass. Heavy cavalry slammed into weakened clusters, smashing them apart. The Knights Templar fought with the conviction of men who believed martyrdom awaited them. Surrounded, outnumbered, blinded, they formed a circle and fought until none were left standing. Their Grand Master, Pon Dobon, was later found with 23 arrows in his body, his sword shattered, lying among heaps of Mongol dead. The Teutonic Knights attempted to break free, forming a wedge and charging blindly through the fog. For a brief moment, they broke the Mongol lines, only to find themselves in open country, pursued by mounted archers. One by one, they fell, their heavy armor now a death sentence as their exhausted horses collapsed beneath them. From the rear, Duke Henry saw the disaster unfolding and made a desperate choice. He raised his personal banner and rode forward, trying to rally what remained of his army. For a moment, it seemed to work. Scattered knights began converging toward him. Then, a single Mongol arrow, loosed by an unknown archer, found its mark, striking Henry beneath the arm, where his armor plates joined. He swayed but did not fall, still swinging his sword. His bodyguards surrounded him, trying to pull him to safety, but the Mongols had spotted the banner. They focused everything on that single point. Henry's guards were cut down, one by one. At last, the Duke, bleeding heavily, fell from his horse. Seeing him collapse, the remaining resistance broke completely. The line turned into a rout, then into slaughter. The Mongols pursued the fleeing men for miles, cutting them down as they ran. Knights tore off their armor to escape faster. Proud nobles cried for mercy in languages their killers neither understood nor cared to. Henry was found alive but dying. Following their custom of honoring brave foes, the Mongol commanders offered him a swift, merciful death. He refused, saying he would die as he had lived, as a Christian knight. They obliged him. His head was struck from his body and mounted on a spear, paraded through Legnica as proof of victory. Days later, his mother searched the battlefield among the corpses. She recognized him only by his sixth toe on the left foot. By noon that day, it was over. The scale of destruction was beyond comprehension. The Mongols, following custom, sliced off the right ear of every fallen enemy to count the dead, filling 9 vast leather sacks. Chroniclers claimed between 10,000 and 25,000 Europeans lay dead upon the field. Virtually the entire nobility of Silesia had been wiped out. The Templars and Teutonic Knights suffered such devastating losses that it would take a generation before their numbers recovered. Entire dynasties that had ruled for centuries were erased in a single morning. Modern historians estimate Mongol losses at fewer than 700 men, most of them from the heavy cavalry that led the final assaults. The battlefield itself looked like something out of hell. Bodies were piled so thick that a man could walk for hundreds of yards without stepping on the ground. Carrion birds darkened the sky, circling so densely they blotted out the sun. The smell of death carried for miles. For years afterward, local farmers would still unearth bones in their fields. In only 3 days, a smaller Mongol force had completely destroyed one of the largest European armies ever assembled. But the Battle of Legnica was more than a military disaster. It was a psychological one. It broke Europe's sense of invincibility and changed the course of its history. News of the defeat swept across the continent like wildfire. In Paris, King Louis IX ordered new fortifications and reorganized his army with updated tactics. In Rome, Pope Gregory IX called for a new crusade, not to the Holy Land, but to defend Europe itself from the so-called horsemen of the devil. Even the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, long at odds with the papacy, suddenly found both sides willing to make peace in the face of this external nightmare. Letters from the time reveal how deeply the terror ran. One German chronicler wrote, "The Mongols are the punishment of God for our sins. They fight not as men do with honor, but as demons with deceit and cruelty. Our knights, the finest in Christendom, were as children before them." The shock went far beyond military loss. The Mongols had proven that the foundation of European power, the armored knight, was obsolete against a disciplined, tactically superior enemy. The proud ideals of chivalry, individual heroism, and honor on the battlefield meant nothing against an army that fought with strategy and precision rather than pride. Yet, Europe's salvation came from an unexpected twist. In December of 1241, only 8 months after Legnica, the great Khan Ogadai died in Mongolia. Some sources say he drank himself to death, others suggest poisoning. By Mongol law, every prince of Genghis Khan's bloodline was required to return home for the election of a new great Khan. Batu Khan, though frustrated at halting his conquest, obeyed. His armies withdrew and Europe was spared. The Mongols would never again advance this far west. Political infighting, vast distances, and the eventual fragmentation of their empire kept them from returning. But the memory of that defeat was burned into Europe's collective consciousness, written in fire and blood. The Battle of Legnica forced a revolution in military thought. Within a generation, European forces began integrating combined arms tactics, strengthening their archery and experimenting with primitive gunpowder weapons. The age of the mounted knight's supremacy had begun its slow death. Professional armies would replace feudal levies. Discipline and coordination would matter more than noble valor. Some historians argue that Legnica may have saved Europe by forcing these changes early. 2 centuries later, When the Ottoman Turks, heirs to Mongol military traditions, marched into Europe, the continent was ready. It met them not with scattered knights, but with organized armies, firearms, and strategy born from painful lessons learned on that blood-soaked plain. Today, the Battle of Legnica is remembered differently across nations. In Poland, it remains both a tragedy and a source of pride, proof that their ancestors stood defiant against impossible odds. In Mongolia, it is celebrated as one of history's most brilliant tactical victories, studied by militaries around the world as a masterclass in strategy and discipline, overcoming numbers and technology. The battlefield itself is peaceful farmland now. A modest monument marks where Duke Henry is believed to have fallen. Each year, on April 9th, reenactors gather there in armor and chainmail, carrying replica weapons to relive the clash. Yet no reenactment can truly recreate the terror of that smoke-choked morning when the medieval world order collapsed on the plains of Silesia. The echo of Mongol hooves still resounds through history, a chilling reminder that no empire, no matter how mighty, stands immune to sudden collapse. At Legnica, the Mongols did not merely defeat an army, they destroyed an entire worldview. They ended an age and forced a civilization to evolve or perish, all of it in just 3 days. 3 days that changed the world forever.